Hi, I'm Stefan, the BMW DIY guy, and I want to show you how to set up one of my favorite tools, the brand new Quickjack's 7000 TLX. All right, y'all, so let's talk about this project a little bit before we do it, and this is truly one of my favorite tools. I just recently upgraded from the 5000 series to the 7000 series from Quickjack. So this is the brand new Quickjack's 7000 TLX. A little bit of a different pump, a little bit of a more higher capacity rails, and I'm really excited to have these. I use my Quickjacks all the time, and I had found that my 5000s weren't quite fitting all of my needs. I needed a larger range to cover a wider variety of cars, and I measured them all out, and the 7000s were perfect. So when you do this and you're evaluating what model that you want, make sure to check out the Quickjack's website. They have a whole measurement chart of how to measure the lift points on your car. So I spent quite a bit of time comparing all the different measurements, like on my M2, on an X5, some of the new M4s, a number of the other cars, to make sure that this was going to be my solution to work for all of them. So I changed to the new model. Now, I'm going to walk you through the setup. It's really not that hard. It takes a little bit of time. Let me show you what it looks like when this package arrives, and hopefully you've got a UPS guy with some muscles. All right, before we get started and I bust everything out of the boxes, let's take a look at the delivery itself. The rails come in these big long boxes, and all three boxes are pretty darn heavy. So this is why, you don't get like overnight delivery. And these will generally come by ground and will require a little bit of space. So make sure that you're set up for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bust out all of the boxes, pull out all of the components, and you can see what this looks like when it's out of the box, and we're going to start assembly. All right, so everything taken out of the box, so you can see what it looks like here. And I will say, coming from the 5000 series, you can definitely see the difference. I mean, all of the support bars here are, they're now square, and they're probably, twice the size of what they used to be. This is a much more solid piece. So you can tell why it's rated for 7,000 pounds. Same thing for your hydraulic cylinder here, significantly larger. But you can see I have all the parts out. So everything laid out and ready to go. One other cool observation is actually the lifting blocks themselves. They now have teeth. They look like building blocks. This is really cool. So if you stack them on top of each other, they'll stick to each other. They're bumpy on one side and hollow on the other, and they'll actually stick together. That is really cool. So potentially you could be stacking these on top of each other, and when we do the setup, we're going to be, but I very likely will end up using this in a scenario where I probably have the big block and the little block stacked on top of each other. So when these are actually sitting, lifting the car, I actually gain even a little bit more room. I usually wouldn't stack the blocks before. They didn't have the same texture, so they could potentially slide on each other. So I'd either use the big blocks or the small blocks. And in this case, I can stack them, which is really, really cool. Okay, so let me get set up a little bit differently, but one of the very... As I drop tools, sorry guys. One of the very first things we're going to do is we're going to be taking the shipping plug out of our hydraulic cylinder. This is a 6mm Allen, so go ahead and take this out on both sides. Go ahead and get your shorter hydraulic hoses. We're going to take that, and I'm going to pull all the parts, but we're going to take our shorter hydraulic hoses. We're going to get them fit onto the cylinder, including the right degree angles right degree connections we put right here. So let me get set up and I'll show you. All right, so I've got a 16 and a 17mm wrench handy. This is a 6mm Allen to take out the shipping plug here out of the cylinder. As you can tell, I've already loosened it. So you can just go ahead and take that out and set it aside. Then you're gonna take, there's two of these, one for each side, which reminds me, so any place where we're gonna do the same thing twice, I'll only show it once because it's gonna be the same process. Okay, now when you install this, you can see the way this is going to install, and you can just screw it into place. But the important part is that you have this bend at the right angle, or the correct angle, which is not straight up and down, not flat, but about 45 degrees. So you can screw the whole assembly in that way, tighten down the nut with your fingers, and just have it in about the right place. I also will leave this cover on until I'm done. Now, one thing, and you might be able to see it just off camera over there, this does come with some thread lock. You do not use any thread lock on these connections. Okay, so I've got my 18mm, and then I'm just going to tighten this down into place once this is at the correct angle. Like I said, you're going to do this on both sides. just like that, okay? All right, so that is good in and nice and firm. We don't want to have any leaks once this is going, okay? So now when you look at your shorter hydraulic hoses, you can tell there's really only two fittings. You've got a male end and a female end. You can tell which end goes here. So you can go ahead and pull this cover off, and this is where that 17 is going to work. Like I mentioned a second ago, I usually leave these covers on until I'm done with them or I'm ready to put the fittings on because I don't want to beat the threads up. Same thing here for the little plug here in the end. All you have to do is just take this little plug out. There we go. And this one's fighting me a little bit. The other one came out much, much easier. There we go. All right. So once you have that set, you go ahead and just set this onto your fitting here. And this is where your 17 millimeter is going to come in. And as I mentioned, you do not use like pipe tape or thread lock or anything like that on these fittings. Very specifically, you do not. Now, the one thing I do want to mention is Quickjacks does provide an excellent manual. Their guide on how to get this all set up and installed is really quite good. So I highly recommend that you have that open and follow through and follow along at the same time. But this video is really for those that are better visual learners, okay? So go ahead and do the other side, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna start putting the fittings on into place. All right, so let's talk about getting these fittings set. And this is where we're gonna either use thread sealant like they've provided, or you can use thread tape. They actually recommend using the thread sealant because if you don't use the thread tape properly, you can get it and it will get into the system and potentially foul your pump. That would be bad. But I'm going to show you both just in case. Now the thread sealant, if you do use this, use a very small drop. And I mean, you don't have to coat this at all. Just pull the cover off, put a very small drop because it'll work its way through the threads. The advantage of this is that it won't get back into your pump and potentially foul. Keep in mind though, that if you do use this, you want to give it 24 hours of cure time. Now, if you do use thread tape, so let's talk about this really quick. Super thin, and you have to make sure that you put it on properly. Because when you put this on, it has to go the right direction. So there's two really important things to keep in mind. We're going to be wrapping clockwise as we go around, and I'll show you that in a second, and never, ever, ever overlap. So as you can see, it would be overlapping and getting into the very top of the fitting itself. So to do this, you would take a little bit of the thread tape, you can stretch it tight, wrap it around. You really only need about one loop, just like that. Tighten it down, and now you can see I've got the thread tape on, it's in the threads, it was wrapped clockwise, and there's a little bit of a gap here at the top because I don't want it to get into that fitting. Now, you can always take your fitting, you can tell which one this is. It's the end with the female end. So you take that and you can start to screw it into place. Now, once this tightens down, you're going to need 2 more wrenches, and it's not something I can do easily and show on the camera at the same time. But you've got a 17 millimeter fitting on this side. So you want to set a 17 millimeter wrench on this side, and this is a 22 millimeter wrench on this side, and you're going to hold one and turn the other, as you can see there, as I'm trying to struggle a little bit and film at the same time. But you have to hold it at both ends to tighten. So as you come around, and I'm getting into the thread tape now so you can see the resistance is starting to build up a little bit. But you're just going to come around and fit that in. Now, it's not as snug as I would like it yet, so I'm going to do that off camera when I get a chance, but you can see the exact process that we're going through. I'm going to go ahead and use thread tape in this case because I actually need to use this tomorrow. So I don't have 24 hours. So I'm good, but if you do, I would recommend using their sealant because that's what they say you should use. Okay, so go ahead and put the fitting on this end and also on the other lift frame as well. And then we're going to move on and we're going to start putting fittings onto the hoses. All right, so you should be familiar with this process by now. So now you've got your big long hoses with 2 female ends. Again, I'm using pipe tape, or you can use their thread sealant. Make sure to wrap clockwise as you go around, and really just kind of one wrap around and then wrap onto itself is enough, and then you can just pull and break it off. I usually will press down a little bit to make sure that it stays into the threads. Same thing, so just take the big connector end here and just get it into place. You feel it start to bite into the thread tape. You're going to want to do this on both sides. The 17 millimeter wrench on this side, 22 millimeter wrench on this side. You're counter turning, or you can hold one and use the 22 to tighten it down. Okay, so go ahead and do all 4. So 1, 2, and then the other hose, 3, 4, and then we're going to attach fittings to the pump. Okay, so as you can tell, I've got the pump on its side, and this is where you're going to want to take the last 2 fittings. This is going to be a 22 millimeter socket again, and I've just taken the bottom one and hand screwed it into place. You don't need sealant or any thread tape on these. They have a gasket right there. And I would do the bottom one first, because that way you can get to it, right? Because if the top one is in, it's going to be in the way. So you're just going to take that, tighten it down nicely, and you can tell it snugs down really, really quickly. And then you can do the top one, okay? So go ahead and get both of those done, and then we're going to finish out our prep. We're going to fill the reservoir and get our frames prepared and ready to go. All right, so there's 2 things left in really getting prepped here. Once your hoses are all done and you have all your connections and fittings on, is you're going to want to add hydraulic fluid. Now, make sure to check the manual. It lists about 8 different kinds of hydraulic fluid. It's automatic transmission fluid that you can put in. So I just went ahead and just bought the cheapest that was down at the auto parts store. So you are going to want to buy this. You are going to need it beforehand. Now, as you can tell, I've got 2 containers worth just in case. You're going to want to use a funnel, so you go ahead and just take the container out, and when you fill the reservoir, you're going to fill it to about a 1/2 inch short of full. Now, keep in mind that you don't have any hydraulic fluid in any of the hoses right now, or anything, the cylinders or anything else. So once we work through actually charging the system, your reservoir will go down, but you don't want to overfill it. Because if it's over full with fluid in the hoses, when you bring the lifts down, you're going to blow fluid out of the top of your reservoir, which is why it's got a release valve in the top, right? So don't overfill. So go ahead and fill up the reservoir right up to about a 1/2 inch short of the top, and keep in mind you are going to have to top it off once we get into the charging stage of all this. Another thing we're going to want to do is we're going to use an air pump to fill the boost cylinders on both sides of the frames, but I'll show you that in just a second. So go ahead and top off the fluid, and then we will charge the boost cylinders. All right, so the one last thing you're going to do on each side are these boost cylinders. Now, these are going to be really important. Now, when I used my 5000s, before I would ever put my car up in the air, I would always check these first. You know, it can be hot, it can be cold in your garage, and this is all about air pressure. So this has a maximum of 50 pounds, and I have a bike pump with just a little gauge on it. So all I do is you just pull the cap off, and then you can charge this up to 50. Now, as I show my old bike pump, so I've got my old bike pump that's got a gauge on it. So I'll charge both of these boost cylinders on both frames to 50 pounds. That is the maximum, but I also find that you get the best lift that way, so I usually set them to 50, not more than that. Okay, so go ahead and charge both cylinders on both sides. And one quick thing as a reminder, as we topped off the tank on the reservoir, I used 2 full containers, so that's 2 quarts plus a little bit more. So when you buy the ATF fluid recommended in the manual, get 3 quarts, not 2, get 3. All right, so go ahead and charge the cylinders, and we're really close to firing these up. So let's get caught up on the setup here. As you can see, I've made a couple of changes, but they were simple. So I wanted to get it set up and then show you what we're going to do. So your hydraulic cylinders here have to be bled. So there's air in them now, and air in the system is bad for a hydraulic system. So you take 2 big blocks, stack them on top of each other, then a medium block, and you put them under this primary support. Now the sticker end should be down, the wheel end up, okay? And make sure that it's stable and it's not going to move. Now, the other thing is you can see your shorter hydraulic hose. You run down through the hose and out through, or out down through the hole, and out through out, and you'll attach it to your main hoses, okay? Now, your bleeder valve is right here. It's a 3/16 hex key or an Allen wrench. So you're going to want to have that handy. I'm using a 5 millimeter Allen, seems to fit just fine. And then you're going to want to have a rag handy as we bleed this as well. So I'm going to put that there for right now. So I've got both frames up, tipped up so we can bleed the cylinders. And I've got my hoses connected, but I still have one off because I wanted to show it to you. Now, couple of things that I've learned in owning one of these setups for quite some time. Be very careful with these connections. So these quick fit, as you can see, this end is good. The male end is going to plug into the female end right here, and you press in. Now, I ruined one of these connections once by pushing too hard and kind of kicking it in sideways. There's a gasket in here, and because the center section is what depresses when you plug the hoses in. So I was too hasty plugging one of these ends in, and I got it kind of sideways, and I tore the gasket on the inside, and then this hose would leak, which was a real problem because the car was in the air at the time. It's not Quickjack's fault, it's my fault. I just banged it up too hard when I put it in. So when you connect these, make sure that you connect them in nice and straight. Now, if you're not familiar with these types of fittings, you'll see, as I turn around here, when this connects in, this collar is going to extend forward. You can see a little ball bearing marking right there and a notch. This collar can turn. It can't right now because it's not extended out and connected to the hose. But this collar can turn. So there'll be times if you're trying to pull this back to disconnect it and it won't come off, it's because that gap, that little keyed gap, has to go right where that marker, kind of that ball bearing is, and then it'll pull back and the hoses will disconnect. Okay, so go ahead and connect all of your hoses, go ahead and plug your pump in, and then we're gonna walk through actually setting this up. So let me explain this really quick and then I'll show you part of it. We're gonna have to go through multiple cycles of bleeding the system. So I'll show you one. We're gonna lift, once I get my hose connected, I'm gonna lift it 8 inches or so. Now, it talks about not up to the first lock point. So let me lift this little locking arm. You can see there's a bar right here. You do not want to go past that locking point. Okay, so about 8 inches up, then down, up and down 3 times, all the way back down. That's going to push air up through the cylinder. Okay, so then you're going to have with your Allen key, you're going to turn this until you can start to hear air come out. Okay, stop until you don't hear any more air, then close it. Then you're going to raise it again, just a little bit, about 1 inch. Come back, bleed it. You're probably going to get some air, maybe a little bit of hydraulic fluid. Close it, raise it up again about another inch. Open the bleeder valve until you get just hydraulic fluid and then close it. Because what you don't want to do, if you put it down, it pushes air back down the cylinder. Okay? You want it pushing it up. And you're going to go through that cycle again and again and again until you don't get any more air out at all, which is why when I mentioned earlier with your reservoir, you're going to have to add a little bit once we're all done, okay? Because all these hoses right now don't have any fluid in it, right? Okay, so let me get set up. I'll get my camera set up, and we're going to show this. Now, one last thing is when these first start going up, don't be surprised if they're coming up unevenly. They're not fully charged yet. They're not going to come up evenly, but that's okay. All right, so let's get started. All right, guys, here we go. So we've got our controller. Again, you're going to come up about 8 inches. As you can see, that took a while because it had to fill fluid into all of those reservoirs. Okay, and then stop. Now, if you notice, they're not going back down, or they can go back down pretty randomly. So I find that if you apply a little bit of pressure, it can help as well. On my previous set of my 5000s, I actually stood on them. But I'm not going to recommend that. But as you can see, they're going back down pretty unevenly, but that's okay. So all the rest of the way back down, bang. Okay, so there's 1. 2, a little bit faster this time, again, because we're have more fluid in the system. Now we're going to go back down again. We're going to do this 3 times total. And again, you know, maybe this is pretty self-obvious or self-evident, but we want to make sure that we do this properly. And it really makes a big difference in how these operate. Because I found that the first time that these lifts weren't going up evenly, it's because my boost cylinders were not even, the pressure was not even, and I was a little low on fluid. Okay, so here's the 3rd time. Again, comes up a little bit faster. I'm going to go about halfway up to the stops. Okay, then we're going to go back down. So this is the 3rd time. Once it goes the rest of the way down, I'm going to use my Allen wrench. We're going to hit the bleeder here on this side. So let me, I'll grab my camera and I'll get it close for the first time to do this, just so you can see it, so you can see what that looks like. All right, guys, so you have the really close-up view there. So let me get my Allen wrench out. And I'm going to expect that I'm going to get a little bit of fluid. So I can go ahead and get my hex key in there. There you go. Still a little bit of air coming out. Sounds like it stopped. Okay, so then I'm going to tighten back up. Now, I'm going to do that on the other side as well, so we can do both sides at the same time, right? But we're going to clean that up. Now, remember at this point, I'm going to go do the other side, but then we're going to bring it back up an inch, bleed it again, bring it back up an inch, bleed it again, then all the way back down, okay? And then we're going to go through the same up, down 3 times, and bleed a couple of more times until you don't get any more air out of the system at all. Okay, so go ahead and get that all taken care of, and your system is going to be almost ready to use. All right, so you can see I still have it up on the lift blocks, but they're all done. So I'm really pleased. It took about 2 cycles. It may take you more until you're not getting any air out of the bleed cylinders at all. Okay, so at this point, you can just take them and put them away. So to unhook everything, like I mentioned, you've got your quick connects here. And as you can see, it's spun a little bit. So all you have to do is just line it up with that notch and pull. Now these are new hoses. Hey, it worked. One-handed. So as you can see, go ahead and disconnect everything. Now, I always make sure to put the caps back on. Keep in mind that you really want to maintain these, make sure that these don't get dirty or you don't have anything that goes in when you actually are connecting it, right? So make sure to put your caps on. So disconnect everything, unplug everything, and go ahead and hang up and put them away. I've seen multiple solutions for these racks. I like to hang mine up on the wall, so I'll hang wheel side down. Now, one last piece of advice. The locks, these locking arms. Now, you're going to see me use these Quickjacks a ton in a bunch of projects where I've got cars up in the air. Always have your locking arms on the outside of the car. So in this case, this would be the passenger side of the car with the locking arm on the outside. That would be the I said it wrong. Sorry, guys. This would be the driver's side. So always make sure to have the lock here on the outside. And on the other side is the passenger side, which has the arm on the other side. Now, one last thing. When you lock up, like I said, there are these quick stops right here. So if you wanted to go to the midway position, you would run it up until you hear these click. They'll go as they go over those stops. The midway position, you go past it. This locking plate will come down, and then you run it, and then you hit down until this hits that locking bar. Then it's secure and in place, whether you're at the mid bar lock or the top bar lock. Okay? So always be really careful when using these. It's really important. But as you can tell, the setup of this isn't hard. So I'm going to hang these up and put them away, and let's wrap up. All right, guys, you can tell they're hung up behind me, so go ahead and clean up and put your tools away. I even went ahead and got the Quickjack hooks, which are really, really nice. Out of all the tools that I've bought to do all my DIY work, these are the best, bar none. It's not a cheap thing to buy, I'll be the first one to say, but it is the most useful. I have cars up in the air all the time, and I can be underneath them with more clearance. I feel much safer, and you don't have that instability of a jack and a jack stand. I highly recommend these, and thank you to Quickjack for making such a fantastic product. Hopefully this install video was helpful and will help encourage you to do the same. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please click like and subscribe. It makes a big difference to my channel, and I'll see you on my next video.